lithium probably won't be the last of our ability to extract and monetize things. So what are we foreseeing in your space? And obviously there aren't any, you clearly stated that there aren't any definitive clear rules on this front, but what are we anticipating when it comes to, if we have these oil and gas producing areas, we have this wastewater, um, and it also is deemed to be, potentially lithium rich. You mentioned East Texas earlier. What guidance are you guys giving your clientele that may reach out to you guys on this front about how they should handle if they're trying to put together a lithium play or, um, something like that? How do they handle HPP leasehold and active production and maybe obtaining that, working out deals with working interest owners, to have access to that water?
Sure. So a lot of it stems around, and you mentioned if it's held by production. So I'll briefly touch on if it's not held by production, if we don't have an active oil and gas lease out on this property. The nice thing about what the legislative process looked like in, I think, 2018, when they amended this bill, is that they did create a specific provision in there for carve outs for oil and gas leases. So the number one thing I'm going to tell a client, especially if there's not, there's not production, there's not on it, is we need to deal with these issues in a lease. Whether you're an operator, whether you're a landowner, you've got to deal with these issues in your lease to say, this is how we are going to treat these things. And that was part of the issue in Cactus, is that they hadn't defined produced water. They hadn't defined water. They had one of the leases talked about oil, gas, and hydrocarbons. And then I think the two other leases just said oil and gas. The issue then, if you're under a lease, you need to look at your lease, because some of it is, sometimes in our leases, we'll see, it's a lease for oil and gas. Sometimes it's a lease for oil, gas, and other hydrocarbons. And then sometimes we just track especially older leases, we just track the reservation language of what we saw in the deeds, and it'll be oil, gas, and other minerals. And if the lease is for other minerals, that's where we get into these issues of like who actually, like what constitutes other minerals. And in Texas, I wish it was more clear. States like Arkansas, so where there's a lot of brine production for bromine, over in the Smackover plays, they've dealt with this because they've been dealing with these issues from the 1950s on. And so they've created legislation that they've really well defined it. In Texas, it's not quite as clear. And there's actually somewhat of a line of demarcation in terms of when the reservation occurred. And I think the date is like June 8th of 1983, where we moved away from what was the surface damages test as to what becomes what we call the surface destruction test for minerals. And then we moved into an era where we started looking at the intended purpose and the language behind it. And so a lot of it's going to depend on what era and what age your lease is.